So, with the recent but not so recent news that DC is basically starting from scratch and soon wiping out the entire DCEU out of existence, I and many others lost any and all excitement for any of the upcoming DC movies this year. Not that there was much to begin with, but you know, it's a weird time for DC, stuck in the midst of releasing movies that have absolutely no future and revolving around characters that no one really cares about in the first place, and still expecting people to show up and pay their hard-earned money for something practically irrelevant. No, Zachary Levi, it's not the fault of marketing, and if it was, then I guess that I would be the only person getting an ad for this movie on every video, to the point where I could probably recite the entire trailer off by heart at this point. Anyway, you probably picked up on the fact that I didn't see this movie in the cinema when it was released over a month ago because, well, I didn't really care to. But I like making videos, and since there's really nothing new to talk about right now, I figured I'd give this movie a go. Why not? And you know, see if it's really as god-awful as people are saying it is. Because we all know that critics are extremely objective and don't let their personal views of actors, which don't line up with their personal agenda, have any influence over their rating of the movie. Anyway, the newest outing in the DCEU was of course Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and this time around we follow Billy and his family as they are faced against a vengeful trio of ancient gods who arrive on Earth in search of their magic stolen from them long ago, forcing Shazam and his allies into a battle for their superpowers, their lives, and even the fate of the world. Now, the first Shazam movie wasn't actually that bad, despite being silly and pretty forgettable all things considered, and Shazam being the polar opposite to Billy in terms of humour, personality, and just his intellect in general. It was a fun movie nonetheless, but not anything worthy of a sequel in my eyes. And if anything, the idea of a team-up between Shazam, a Superman and Black Adam was probably the main thing on everyone's mind. But hey, they decided to do a full 180 on the fans, and they went forward with a sequel, and well, they couldn't have timed it any worse. The movie absolutely bombed, proving that 1, no one cares about DC anymore, 2, no one wanted a sequel, and 3, the DCEU as a whole was a complete and utter failure. I mean, the fact that they managed to f*** up an entire cinematic universe consisting of the likes of Batman and Superman, 2 of the biggest IPs of all time, even before the infection of woke agenda really came into play in Hollywood, just goes to show how much of a mess this entire universe was to begin with no coherent storyline, no solid world building due to their desperation to catch up with Marvel and the MCU, and now putting themselves in a position where they have to restart their entire universe from scratch after they practically flushed hundreds of millions down the toilet, and now they have James Gunn at the head of it all, who, by the way, still has a Marvel movie coming out and has to promote that movie while he's the head of their rival company. Anyway, I digress. Basically, Shazam 2 it didn't do very well, we all know that, but did this movie really deserve the hate, or did this movie just get caught in a really unlucky circumstance where it no longer serves any purpose to the bigger picture going forward? Or is everyone right? And was this movie a complete waste of time, regardless of the fact if it had a future or not, and no one would have cared to see it anyway? Well, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, while not being the most disastrous movie I've ever seen, and definitely not the worst movie of the year so far, is what I can only describe as not really knowing who the movie was meant for. This film very much encapsulates why and how the superhero genre very much fell off. For the most part, it feels a lot like a kids movie. All the humour and cheesy comedy makes it all too easy not to take this story seriously, and it's just bombarded with a bunch of plot elements that feel like they're taken straight out of Goosebumps and old mythology instead of the comics themselves. The whole story is just, well, pointless. This is a movie that genuinely no one really wanted and no one really asked for, and instead of giving the fans what they want, and because the alpha male said no, it feels like they went ahead and tried their hardest to put something together that would hopefully intrigue fans based on a hero that at best, you know, deserves to be alongside bigger characters and a bigger story going up against bigger villains that fans actually know and care about, instead of being alongside a bunch of adults with child personalities that, you know, for the last 10 minutes of an origin movie is somewhat fun and amusing, but for a 2-hour picture doesn't really get anyone rushing to book their seats. And you know, that brings us on to the characters, because of course, there's Shazam himself, or Captain Marvel, I don't f***ing know, who a lot of people with the first movie were quick to point out the pretty significant difference in personality between Billy and Billy as Shazam. It was like he de-aged intellectually by about 10 years, and then his level of outgoingness and carelessness was dialed up to 11. They just felt like complete polar opposites, and there was rarely an instance where the two personalities actually matched up, or you felt like you were actually watching Billy in a different body. No fault to the actors, they were just doing what they were told, and I know that the writers want these movies to have some humour and feel good to them, but, you know, damn, just at least have some consistency. It's not that hard. But unfortunately, this second movie was no different, and if anything, it took it even further. I mean, Billy barely even smiles, let alone conveys their energy and enthusiasm like Shazam does. Every other character is much better written, at least in terms of, being more in line with their real selves while they're in their superhero bodies. So there's really no reason for them to go this hard on the difference in Shazam's personality. I mean, it's just even more reason to conclude that this movie was made for 6-year-olds, as kids aren't going to give a if the personality doesn't match up. They just like hearing jokes. Now, in terms of the character growth, Billy does come to realize that in his heart, he knows what he must do to protect those around him, and the reason that he was allocated the powers of Shazam, because basically, he sacrifices himself, which, actually made me root for the guy and, genuinely appreciate that he was willing to do that. And it actually made me like the movie at least a tad bit more. But then he's just brought back to life and everything kind of just moves on swiftly. Like, Jesus, fair enough if this whole universe thing was still happening. But considering that we're never going to see this guy again, at least this version of him in this universe, putting him to rest wouldn't be the worst idea. But, just let Wonder Woman save the day or whatever. There's also a romantic bond between Freddy and Athena, even though she's like, 6,000 years old and the guy's 17. But hey, love is love, right? Anyway, that's all I can really say about these guys. As for the villains, I mean, I wouldn't have ever expected Helen Mirren in a Shazam movie, a superhero movie in general, but Hollywood's full of surprises at this point. And to be honest, she's great in the role as Hespera because, well, she's Helen Mirren, you know what I mean? And excluding Athena, who's, just barely a villain, she's joined alongside Lucy Liu, and is very much the more evil of the two, ready to bring chaos onto Earth and its people, despite it being unnecessary when they have what they need. But, she's pissed up at this point, so I don't even blame her. Personally, I think the dynamic between the two was pretty solid, and although these two aren't from the comics, they still made for some interesting antagonists, who just simply want revenge for being locked up for so long, and want to get back what's rightfully theirs. I mean, they're pretty dumbed down though, considering where they came from on their power set, and they could have been a lot more ruthless, which could have, added to their already pretty sizable threat level, and, not allowed Shazam to give himself those crucial extra seconds to warm up his next comedy act for every scene. It would have just given the movie a greater tonal shift where it actually feels like there's more to lose and greater stakes on the line, and not just a reason to, have them read letters that they can't make sense of, because funny. Now, what I will say is, and I can't believe I have to say this, but, Hollywood, this movie isn't really woke, at least to the extent that it's, so in your face that the story isn't even trying to be entertaining anymore. It's just an avenue for pushing an agenda in politics. You'd have to be pretty cynical to criticize this movie for trying too hard to appeal to a modern audience, because as I said, the only audience it really appeals to, in my eyes anyway, is one that hasn't even hit puberty. Overall though, Shazam 2 is a pretty average but forgettable movie that doesn't really know what it's trying to achieve or what it's going for, and with a future at DC or not, it kind of just felt like a 2-hour advert for Skittles more than anything else. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen, but it's pretty flawed and doesn't have many redeeming qualities, not to mention the fact that it's just plain irrelevant as well. So I will say that if you haven't seen the movie already, and because I've pretty much spoiled the whole thing, I wouldn't really suggest it's worth your time, unless you're going to watch it with your kid or something, because they'll certainly enjoy it more than I did. Anyway, thank you for watching the video, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Won't force you though, of course, and I will see you guys in the next one very, very soon.